So let's start with, what is anxiety? So anxiety is experienced cognitively and physically. And it's a combination of mind-body responses, disproportionate reactions, false alarms, all or nothing thinking, and negative expectations. So, what happens is that there can be episodes of fear or worry in the absence of a genuine threat. And sometimes there's real concern, but the reaction is disproportionate to the event itself. So, for example, let's say, I am living in my cave and I'm hungry and I go out to get something to eat and I'm picking some berries and I hear crick crick and I look up and 100 yards away is a tiger. My amygdala, the fight, flight, or freeze response, the organ in our brain that's responsible for those, fight, flight, or freeze, kicks in and it takes over my thinking brain, my prefrontal cortex, and it basically gets me running or fighting, and in some cases freezing, which hopefully I don't do because I'll be eaten by the tiger. So what I'm going to do instead is run back to my cave and recover. Wow, boy, that was scary. It takes maybe about 3 to 5 seconds for your brain to register through the senses and through the hypothalamus in the brain to which is like the grand central station organ of our brains, to send a message to the amygdala, and it reacts faster than our thinking brain. So if you're standing on the edge of on a curb and you're about to cross the street and a car whizzes by really fast, your amygdala will help you jump back before your brain processes what that is. So it's the same when I'm in my jungle getting my berries. But now the next day comes, I'm still hungry. So I go back into the jungle and I'm picking my berries, but I'm a little aware that something could be off. And as I'm picking my berries, I hear crick crick. My body has the same response, has a response based on the information that it got yesterday when I saw the tiger. And so there's a freeze. So what happens is the amygdala, sends messages to the muscles to tighten up, get ready to fight or flee, to digestion, to slow down, start perspiring. There are all kinds of physiological responses. Interestingly, what happens, that message that goes to the amygdala that there's danger happens so quickly, anywhere from, I think, like milliseconds to up to 3 or 5 seconds. But then what happens is that it takes the body about 15 to 20 minutes to slow down after the amygdala sends all of its adrenaline and cortisol everywhere, because it activates those systems. So here I am, I'm picking my berries and I hear crick crick, and I look up expecting to see a tiger, but I don't see a tiger. And I hear crick crick again, and I look up, and in the trees I see a monkey swinging from a branch. So I've had the same physiological reaction, the tightness, the drop in my stomach, I'm perspiring, ready to go ready to flee at any minute, when this time there's not a danger, but my body remembers the sound, so it remembers the experience and the previous danger. So this is why we say that anxiety can work when there is a danger, but it often is reflective of a false alarm, an episode of fear or worry in the absence of a genuine threat. And there might be a real concern, but the response is disproportionate. So anxiety reflects all or nothing thinking and a negative expectancy. And the top predictor of depression in kids is untreated anxiety, often due to peer isolation. Anxious teens in particular struggle with tolerating uncertainty and solving problems effectively. Anxious kids also struggle with tolerating uncertainty, and they tend to fall a little bit lower on autonomy scales, meaning that they depend on other people more to tell them what to do or to lead them to safety, rather than learning how to reassure themselves and understand what's happening. We want to teach kids to be bored by anxiety, not frightened by it. Now, here's the thing that's tricky for people. How do you know if the anxiety that your child is showing is typical or if it's more atypical and something to be concerned about and to talk about with your primary care provider or, to seek therapy for? So, is the response that you're seeing from your child age appropriate? Is the reaction out of proportion to the actual danger? And are they able to recenter themselves? Do they have the tools to actually help themselves slow down? We want to also ask, what might be happening at home or at school that is influencing their behaviors and their emotions. So I'd love it if you could put in the chat something specific that that your child might be worried about, because there are some differences here between worries and anxiety. And let me tell you what those are. There's a difference between nervousness, which is unfamiliarity with a new task or situation, worry, how we think about something, and anxiety, those physical responses based on negative thoughts. Now, I'm someone who struggles with anxiety, and I know that we worriers have very good imaginations. And there are different types of worry. Productive worry is worry about doing things, and sometimes it can be motivating. Poisonous worry is worry about things you cannot control. Will the thunderstorm? Will people like me? If the plane I'm on is going to crash? You can't manage that. And so that kind of worry, which is what really kind of eats at people who struggle with anxiety a lot, is poisonous. Now, one of the things that happens with nervousness is you're unfamiliar with a task, but when you learn how to do that task, or when you're nervous about the first day of school, but once you've gone to school the first day, you're okay after that, that uncertainty diminishes. Worry is repeatedly expecting a negative outcome. And anxiety is a condition of over-responding to a fear or worry. Worriers turn what ifs into believable situations. Now, the flip side about that is that worriers are actually very good planners. We have future-focused thinking and creative ways of seeing things. So let's go back a little bit to talk about some of the statistics around anxiety in the United States. About 1/8 of children in the United States or teens have an anxiety disorder. About 9% is what we're finding right now. So that may or may not be 1/8, and have been taken to see a medical provider or a therapist. There's a higher rate of anxiety among females, children and teens, about 38%, than for males, 26%. 75 to 80% of teens with an anxiety disorder also have another condition or diagnosis. 35% of kids with ADHD have a formal anxiety diagnosis. And that's really interesting because I believe, and many of my colleagues do, that number is very low, because kids may have anxiety but may not meet the criteria for an anxiety disorder, or may not have been taken to see a provider about anxiety, and so they're not counted in whatever way that we're counting to come up with these statistics. If you have a child who is on the spectrum, about 40% of those kids have a coexisting anxiety condition. And we want to remember that if your child's primary diagnosis is autism spectrum disorder, about 50% of those kids have ADHD as a co-occurring condition. But if your primary diagnosis is ADHD, about 14% of those kids have an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. So let's look at some of these comments about the kinds of worries that your kids are telling you. Safia, my daughter depends on me when she's anxious, and I'm trying to help her manage it as she has ADHD and it comes with it. Yes, anxiety and ADHD travel together a lot. And we think this is because of how the ADHD brain is wired. There's some research to suggest that the amygdala may be smaller in people with ADHD, that this part of the prefrontal cortex that connects to the emotional brain, the limbic system, can be smaller, and the hippocampus, the seat of memory, might also be a little bit smaller. And in all those cases, these all affect emotional control and response to events that could be distressing. Hi, Elaine. Let's see. Let me go back. Safia says she's worried about things she said and questions them. So we're talking, in your case, Safia, about a specific type of anxiety, and that is social anxiety, a fear of social situations where you may be judged. So we see this often in kids with ADHD. Dr. Thomas Brown, a leading expert on ADHD, says about 1/3 of people with ADHD have a social anxiety disorder. It could be higher now since COVID. And this is when they're worried about what they said or they didn't say or how they could have done things differently. And so they're thinking about what someone else is thinking about them, not necessarily because they have facts about that, but because they're projecting their own thoughts onto this person. And attributing reactions that this person may have that may not have anything to do with what actually they're feeling, but it's what your child may be perceiving. There are other types of anxiety, of course, many. There's separation anxiety, which we see in younger children, fear of leaving a caretaker, specific phobias, fear of specific objects or situations, general anxiety, which is fear about, kind of common aspects of daily life, social anxiety, something called agoraphobia, which is fear of being in public places, panic disorder, which is an intense fear that reaches a peak, including physical symptoms, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is being a witness or victim of a traumatic event, followed by intrusive thoughts, intense reactivity or avoidance, obsessive compulsive disorder, which are recurring thoughts or behaviors aimed at reducing anxiety that cause distress in daily functioning. And then there are others: hoarding, skin picking, and selective mutism. Looking at your comments now. So let's see. Carolina says, trying out for cross country for the first time. It's definitely more than worry or just normal nervousness. What if I get hit by lightning? What if a branch falls and hits me? So these what ifs form the core of general anxiety concerns. And with ADHD, because many people with ADHD struggle with working memory, it's not necessarily one of their strengths, and often with slower processing speed. So in their cognitive profile, working memory and processing speed may be lower scores than verbal comprehension or visual spatial reasoning or fluid reasoning. And so what happens is that because of the challenges with working memory, kids don't recall what they might have done in previous situations that they could apply to this situation. And we all do that when we're stressed. Somehow our anxiety is very talented at erasing our memories of success. And so we don't remember times when we did succeed. And that's really an important thing that we can do as adults, to be able to say to our children, it makes sense that you're nervous. You're trying something new. Let's think of some times when you tried something new and how those worked out. What did you do? How did you manage your fear or concern in those situations? We'll talk in a minute later about specific what ifs. Chris says, my 18-year-old has a new, to me, fear of being over open water. We recently took a trip from Washington to British Columbia on a ferry boat. We tried to talk him through the trip to reassure him that this boat makes the journey 4 times a day, but he really just wouldn't go with us and stayed home instead. I think he regrets his decision since we really had fun, We super missed him. Yeah, so what happens is in those situations, Chris, anxiety, what I call the worry monster takes over, and the fears become so big and so irrational that the alternative voices of even your rational responses don't matter because the worry has taken over the thinking brain. And so if we think about Daniel Siegel's the amygdala hijack, where if this is your brain and the amygdala is deep inside the emotional brain, the middle of our brain, when people are in an amygdala hijack, the amygdala comes out and it takes over the thinking brain, and your thinking brain goes on a little vacation to the Bahamas. And in that case, your amygdala is kind of running the show, and because it's not modulated by thinking, it's all over the place and it's just pure emotion. And so we have to teach our kids how they can really learn to talk back to that part of themselves that is that pure negative emotion. And I'm going to talk to you about how to do that in a minute. Let's see. Safia, my daughter has ADHD and Asperger's. Thank you. Elaine, our daughter has been diagnosed with pandas by an immunologist. Okay. Adele, my 22-year-old is very fearful of COVID, wears a mask everywhere, which to me will lead to not connecting with others. It could. Lead to not connecting with others. I think that it's we also understand that COVID was very traumatizing for a lot of people. And sometimes what we're seeing in kids and in young adults is an overreaction to a fear of germs, and an inability to trust and believe that the vaccinations work and that there's now medication that works. And so we'll talk about that in a second. You're welcome, Safia. Elaine, can new baby siblings arrival and resulting disruption in the maternal attention attachment cause big anxiety exacerbation? Oh, yes, it can. Of course, because somebody who's been the focus of a certain amount of attention has now been displaced. So we will see an intensity and an exacerbation of anxiety. Hello, Rice Psychology. Nice that you're here. Thank you. Carolina, yes, you're going to apply past successes when tried something new. This is very important. In fact, it happened to me the other day. I was having to face something that was new and novel and a bit scary, and I was having a little freak out. And I was on the phone with a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, who is a psychologist, and she said to me, Sharon, I want you to think about something you did in the last year that was really hard. And I thought, oh, I know what that is. Some of you may know this, but in my free time, I write and direct and produce cabaret shows, and I sing in them. And I had a show scheduled for last October, and I got a very bad case of bronchitis. And despite the bronchitis, I was able to go on and perform. And that is something that I forget and I have to remember, because I was very scared, I was very anxious, and I also knew my body had to heal. And so I had to just practice and follow the directions of a voice therapist so that I got better. So being able to look back at something that was hard and I succeeded at, and how did I do that? What tools did I use? Helped me deal with this problem that I had, that I was facing. You're welcome, Chris. Carolina, we included our ADHD child in all aspects of baby care. I can't do this without you. Yes, you can. If you want to really get a good laugh at who Dr. Sharon Saline is, you can go to my Sharon Saline Cabaret page and look it up, and you'll see me. I don't think I have my recent show there, but I have some other little clips. You'll probably be entertained and mortified at the same time. I'm glad that the worry monster helped. So one of the things that we want to think about when we're talking about the worry monster is that we want to befriend the worry monster. The worry monster is a sign that your child doesn't think they can handle something that they're facing. And so this anxiety is saying, you can't do this, you can't handle it, as a protective device, so you're not exposing yourself to something that you maybe couldn't handle because the tiger could come back, right? So one of the things that we see with ADHD is that flooding happens more often. These emotional tidal waves, right? So it's a result of emotional regulation issues from living in a world not designed for neurodivergent brains. The lack of filters in the brain for internal and external stimulation in the ADHD brain, combined with that full-on switch, which we see with people with ADHD, right? It's all or nothing, or now or not now, the ADHD brain. And when feeling comes into awareness, and then that flooding begins. And so what we see with a lot of kids and teens with ADHD is a limited a range of coping strategies due to their executive functioning challenges that lead to increased disorganization and dysregulation. When we're thinking about anxiety and we're looking at anxiety, we want to stay out of the content because anxiety is a shapeshifter. It'll come up as, oh, I'm afraid I'm trying out for cross country. I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to run fast. What if a truck hits me? And then you solve that problem. And then it comes up again. Oh, I have a math test. What if I'm not going to do well in my math test and I fail math? So, and then you're just playing whack-a-mole, right? So we want to look at the patterns of anxiety when anxiety emerges, right? When those worries take over. What's happening in the environment or within the person in those moments? ADHD brains struggle with turning on or turning off emotional processing and actions, which can lead to that flooding. And emotions can build under the surface of awareness until they stand out so much they can't be ignored. And then we have an outburst. So what we want to do when we're thinking about, helping our kids manage anxiety is settle the body and then settle the mind. Because if someone is still quite activated with adrenaline and cortisol, there isn't a lot of listening that's going on. And the thinking brain hasn't made it all the way back from Bermuda. It's only about halfway home. So we really want to find ways of self-soothing that your kids can access. And you can put it on a list in their phone, a list on the refrigerator, a list on their room, activities that help them slow down and recenter. I've had people who want to play with who need to pet their cat, or one girl I knew had a bunny. Another girl I knew had a bed that was off the ground like this much and will go under her bed where she had a flashlight and a book because she felt very cozy. Sometimes a weighted blanket. Sometimes just having a little quiet corner with some puzzles or some coloring books. We want to maybe consider having a playlist. I have a playlist of happy songs. So if I'm feeling sort of stressed or a little bit angry or worried, I put that on, and that really helps me change my mood. Exercise is great. Maybe go for a run or a walk. We want a whole list of these options so that you can pick one and try it. One of the options that's very helpful is for some kids is being with you, not necessarily having you solve it for them, because you can't, but you can give them a hug, you can tell them that you love them, and you can tell them what my friend's son told me once about his grandmother. So my friend's son Ian said to me that his grandmother died, and we were gathering for what we call Shiva in the Jewish religion. Some of you know that I'm Jewish, and if not, you do now. And Shiva is a time where it's a week or several days where people come and visit, and you tell stories and prayers and support, and of course there's food. And so I went up to Ian and I said, so tell me what was special to you about your grandmother. And he said, well, my bubby, which is Yiddish for grandmother, used to pat my hand, and she would say, whenever I was upset about anything, she would say, Ian, I believe in you. I know you're going to be able to figure this out. And I, Sharon, literally almost fell off my chair. I mean, no one in my family ever did that for me. Can you imagine having a grandmother just rub your hand and say, I believe in you. I know you're going to be able to figure this out. Wow. That kind of takes that worry monster and sticks a pin right in that balloon. Poof, right? You're going to be able to figure this out. Because anxiety tells you lies. Lies like you can't do it. What if scenarios are absolutely justified? The person whose son wouldn't go on the boat in open water. Your son had justified to himself that all of these what if scenarios were completely 100% true. You're not good enough. Anxiety tells you that. You don't deserve it. You're stupid. You shouldn't ask for help. And you're losing your mind. Now, adults often make responses. Adults have common responses they make with worried kids. One, they may push them too hard or get angry with them. They may allow inappropriate behavior. Anxiety loves this. So if you want your kid to have more anxiety, please do this. Allow them to scream and kick and yell and break things when they're anxious. Making irrational accommodations. So I'm going to drive way out of my way so we don't go past the graveyard because you're afraid of graveyards. Minimizing, oh, don't worry, it'll be fine. Or reassurance. That's also part of minimizing. So it'll be fine can be part of reassurance. So reassurance and minimizing can go together. Minimizing, it's not that big a deal. Reassurance, oh, don't worry, it'll be fine. And sometimes it'll be fine mixes them together because you're A, not validating their concern as real, and B, you're letting them know that you're sure that it's going to work out when actually you have no certainty about that. So let me look at some comments here. Let's see. My son, 10, has ADHD and OCD. Thank you, Keith. He has separation anxiety. Sometimes, even if him and his mom stay in the car and I run into a store, he gets anxious. Like he sees me as his protector and feels unsafe without me, even though there is no history for him to feel this way. Right. So here's the thing. These are feelings. People have feelings, and we all have had to learn to tolerate our various feelings. And those feelings that often accompany anxiety have to do with disappointment or lack of safety, or I can't manage this alone. So our job as parents is to sort of shift that thinking by having phrases that talk back to the part of ourselves that is saying those things. Now, I think it's very helpful to name that part of ourselves. I come from a psychodrama background and, studied a little bit of IFS. What's the name of that part of yourself that is wagging its finger and telling you it's going to go terribly? Mine is perfectionistic Poindexter. And the alternate to that is courageous Sharon. And so courageous Sharon and perfect Poindexter kind of get into it sometimes. But it's important that I feed courageous Sharon, that courageous Sharon can come up with something to say to perfect Poindexter. So we want to play with this a little bit because anxiety hates when you play with it. And that means that's a good thing, right? So what are the 5 C's solution to managing anxiety? I've written about the 5 C's in my book, What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew, and in my card deck, the Family Solution Deck. So the 5 C's approach to managing anger. 1, self-control. Manage yourself first. If you're feeling activated, your kids are going to pick that up. They have this amazing antenna that moves around and it picks up the unconscious vibes of their parents. It's really impressive. So we want to manage ourselves first, and then we want to interrupt anxious thinking, anxious reaction, and worried thinking by using breathing techniques and self-soothing methods that kids have identified with you in advance. In the middle of a panic attack or a meltdown of some kind, there is no thinking, no listening that's occurring, which is why we have to plan that they're going to occur. Most of us parents are like, well, let's hope that was a one-time thing, because I don't want to deal with that again. And boop, it's going to come up again, because there's a pattern to anxiety. Anxiety is trying to help you find answers for managing in situations where you don't think you have the resources to do that. Compassion, the second C. We're going to consider the situation or the fear or the worry from the youth's perspective. Stay supportive in the face of really irritating and frustrating behaviors, because anxiety is acting out everywhere to try to get you to do what it wants. Right? So instead of reassuring, you could put your arm around your 9-year-old and take out your invisible lightsabers and say, okay, Mr. Walter Worry Monster, we've got this. You can step back here because, my daughter, Chloe, and I, we've come up with some things to say to you and ways to figure out the situation. So just sit back down because we've got this. That's very different than saying, don't worry, it's going to be fine. Right? Very, very different. So, and because that also reflects the third C, collaboration. How are you going to work together on creating solutions to reduce the power and the influence of the worry? Consistency. Encourage regular daily routines and respond as similarly as you can when the worry monster raises its ugly head and says, oh, that sounds like the worry monster. What do we need to say back to it? And I'm sure those of you who are parents of teenagers are shaking your head and thinking, no way, Sharon, no way are my teenagers going to listen to me doing this. That may be true. How can you adapt these principles to your teenager? Because again, we want to acknowledge that the worries are real, but the response to the worries, the catastrophic magnification, is not effective in terms of finding solutions. And the last C, of course, is celebration. We're going to acknowledge courageous behavior, even small steps. Whatever step is moving in the direction of countering that worried, negative narrative voice in their heads, that's progress. Elaine says, Bermuda, you like that. Thank you, Elaine. Carolina, I have a bunch of playlists based on emotions. For me, I'm going to help my kids put theirs together. Great. Chris, a weighted blanket is really helpful for my 13-year-old. Yes, when he is emotionally dysregulated, especially after school. Hugs and mom's presence really helps too. Just presence and quietly sitting near. Beautiful, Chris. I love this because your physical being is offering comfort. You're not solving it, but you're letting your child know, I'm here. I'm here. And that is attunement. And parental attunement is what nurtures the deepest connections and helps build the greatest self-esteem. Elaine, IFS is internal family systems. I apologize for using the shortcut language. It was created by Richard Schwartz. There are some really interesting books to read. One of my favorites is called No Bad Parts. Carolina, check. I believe in you. You can figure this out, and I'm here for you. Isn't that beautiful? I've started to say that to myself, and I teach it to all my clients, and I attribute it to my friend Ian's Bubby. I just love that. It's Sharonized a bit, but you get the sense. Okay, so how are we going to change our relationships to worry? Because this is the key, right? This is really the key that we want to focus on. We want to change our relationship to worry by noticing and naming bodily signals as warnings about worry. Whoop, I realize that I'm feeling those butterflies in my stomach, or I feel that like tightness in my chest, or I'm clenching my hands, or I notice I'm clenching my jaw. What are the ways that we can pay attention to the signs that the worry monster is on the horizon, quickly followed in tandem by anxiety? We want to identify goals. So here's the thing. For the person whose son didn't go on the trip, what was the goal? The goal for your son probably was to avoid being in open water and not dying. But there might have been another goal too. I want to go on the family trip, but I'm afraid to. How can we identify the goal? I want to go on the family trip, so I'm willing to do this baby step. I want to run cross country, so I'm willing to go to tryouts. And my friend has said that she'll come with me, even though she's not trying out, to give me support. What are ways that you can get through something that is frightening and hard for you? I want to do X, so I'm willing to try Y. We want to shift the focus from things that aren't working to things that are. Anxious people do not focus on what is going well. They focus on what isn't going well and what could also come down the pike that could be even worse. So one of the things that I think is important and that I love to ask my anxious clients, or when I'm teaching, I like to suggest, is to ask our kids, what could go right? You've got a whole list of what's going to go wrong. What could go right? And this might be based on a previous experience where you've succeeded, or maybe we could do a little reading about the probability of ferry accidents. What could go right? And encourage them to take a small risk in a similar area and see what happens. So maybe before the ferry trip, we'll go and maybe we'll rent paddle boats and paddle around, or we'll try a canoe just to see what it's like a little bit. Or maybe not even go on the water, but just sit in the canoe that's tied to the dock. There are a few tools for responding to anxiety that I want to go over before we stop. So we want to name the worry and empathize with it. Instead of reassurance, we want to use validation. We also want to consider probability. I ran a group maybe a year and a half ago for anxious teens. And we taught all these tools, including mindfulness. And we asked the kids what was the number one most useful tool. And they said probability. Second by best case and worst case scenario. So people who are anxious and are worried are excellent at identifying the worst case scenario. What's the best case scenario that you could imagine? It could be a fantasy, but nonetheless, let's imagine that for a minute and work our way down to something between the worst case and the best case that would be okay enough. Sometimes we have to take a risk, and we might have to fake it to make it. I'm not sure. I don't know if I can do this. I really don't know if I can do this, but I'm going to pretend that I can do this and then see what happens. We could also ask our kids, if you had a future self 5 years from now who had already tried out for the cross-country team, or who had already passed your math test, what would that future self say to you? Right? So if you were your aspiration, if you were brave Chloe, if you were brave Kenyon, what would that brave self say to you? In the dear future self, you could write a letter and say, dear future self, I want you to be blah, 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 blah. That's an option too. And finally, believe it or not, there's been research on what we call the Batman effect. I've changed that to be the superhero effect, which is that if we pretend that we're someone who we admire and look up to, we can take on some of their qualities. So who is someone that your child looks up to? Is it LeBron James? Is it Beyonce? Is it, political figure? Who is someone that your child looks up to and really admires? And what are some qualities that they have that your child might want to adopt? I'm just going to wear the coat of Beyonce's, incredible talent when I step out and have to try out for a solo in chorus, something like that. So we've talked a lot here about paying attention to what's working, and I'm putting again in the chat my downloadable on helping teens overcome anxiety. We're asking what could go right instead of what goes wrong. We're identifying stressful situations in advance and exploring alternative responses. We're planning for recovery time after something stressful. And we're creating a list of what those options might look like before. We want to remember that that yes starts the process of change and yet keeps it going. So I can't do this is one way of saying something, but I can't do this yet opens the door. We want to talk about whatever fears of failure they might have, what they are, when they come up, where they come from. And finally, a key component of my fourth C, consistency, is what I call efforting. So it's a steadiness of effort. An effort for people with ADHD is a full body experience. It's physical, it's mental, it's emotional. So we're going to focus on noticing the effort as much or more than the outcome. I see a few comments. Let's see. Chris, thank you for providing a good question to ask an older ADHD anxiety person. What could go right? Thank you for this. I like the idea of renting a boat and leaving it tied to the dock. Thank you. Validating is very important. You're most welcome, Chris. Matthew, yes, probability has saved me from anxiety so many times. Isn't that the truth? And even just trying to think about the positives that could happen in a situation can shift. My perfect Poindexter will shrink a little bit when I ask myself, what could go right? Well, this could go right. Or they would like your presentation, or you'll get your work done in time because you have in the past. Let's think about when you did this or that. So it really is helpful. And because anxiety is very good at erasing memories of success and triumph, we hold those for our kids, for our clients, and we can help them when we're asking them to make a list or remember things.